Help me welcome Susan Merrell.
So I sort of apologized. It was scarier than I remembered. It was really scary, and I'm surprised at how scary and how different it is from the story.
What? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's a kind of a crudeness to the movement in the movie that there isn't in the story. Do you know?
What do you mean by crudeness?
The gestures are really big. The colors are really. The red is red. It's so much red, and the blue is blue, and everything is very unsubtle, actually. Compared to the story, which is a miracle of subtlety. So, but it was very fun to watch and super scary. I really do apologize. It was scarier than I remembered. So.
Why did you think of this film when we were talking about adaptations and as you said before, how an artist makes his art based on someone else's art?
Well, so when you first asked me, I actually didn't even think because we had already done Shirley, which would have been the obvious choice for me, but when I thought about movies that had dramatically impacted me in ways that, decades later, I still think about this movie. And the story, I feel, is one of the most beautiful, teachable stories, and actually more contemporary to its time. So in 1971, when the story came out, the story is super... their marriage is super egalitarian. The treatment of the sisters, at one point they think they're a lesbian couple or maybe men dressed as women, and they're very open-minded in the story. And John is very likable. He's like a really good husband. And in the movie, it's a little bit mixed, but I really never processed the relationship between the film and the story, and I think I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as you said, the film is less subtle, than the story. In fact, it pushes, but the story doesn't have. You don't see the girl die. I think she dies of a disease, and in the story, So you don't see any of that, and
Johnny has appendicitis.
Yeah.
So neither of them are. Neither of the deaths are as scary as they are in the film.
But that prologue, I mean, how beautiful is that with all the connections? It connects it starts the issue with the color, the water, which is a connection. It's also, it's not hinted in the story, the way you see water, and then Venice is water, and then, the puddle is water, so what he can do, like sort of paint.
And glass and water and
glass and glass and water. So it's very artful, and it's just an interpret. And the red,
it's crazy.
But the red is not, in the story, is not the girl's.
It's Laura.
It's Laura's, yeah.
So Laura has a red raincoat, and it's pretty much the only color in the story, I think, is the red raincoat she's wearing on the funeral, procession, in the funeral procession, not in the movie. But I think the thing that is quite astounding about the story is that every single thing that happens is flagged and made very clear in the first page and a half. So the entire story is there, but the movie is built in a kind of a regular movie way, in that the beginning and the ending really sort of wrap together, and the events, every event that is unfolded is resolved in the order, in reverse order to its presentation, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it collapsed time completely.
Yeah.
It's past and present, which is the premise of the, this underlying premise of the story, but it's one thing, and here it just keeps coming.
Yeah, and there are all kinds of details about their life that are necessary, I think, for movie world, but in story world, you don't know them at all. Like, John doesn't have a job in the story, but in the movie, his job is very important to why they're there. And there are other elements of time and plot movement that are invented for the movie that are quite wonderful, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned before that in the story, which is so essential, the relationship is evolved, is very evolved for the times. And I was reading today something that a couple of things that Rogue said when Nicholas Rogue said, and he said one of the things what he really liked, it was a story to him. The story was reflected a happy family. And
yes.
And that was his point in, it wasn't the death, it wasn't the end, the colpo di scena at the end. It was the fact that it was this marriage that was a happy marriage,
Yeah, and I actually I was saying to I think to Lynn or Roger, Lynn is over here somewhere, on the way in that I had forgotten. I read this week about the sex scene, which I had forgotten because I saw the movie when I don't even know how young I was. I should not have seen it probably, but that the way the sex scene folds and unfolds on itself is miraculous. The dressing and undressing and opening and closing of their love is sort of completely condensed in place right there.
Yeah. And it was scandalous at the time when the movie came out.
I can imagine. I mean, all those bare bodies, so yeah.
And there were rumors circulating that the sex was real, and everybody got very upset. And Warren Beatty was dating Julie Christie, got really upset.
Oh, that's so funny.
And started, and it was like trying to stop the movie. I mean, these are all like urban legends, but in fact, it wasn't real, and they were apparently shy. But it
that's
is
funny because it looks very real.
It looks to the point. It's to the point of where we're talking about having this relationship between these two people to be, a good one. For Rogue, this is the moment where they kind of almost overcome is their love, their unity. So, it referred to it as a love scene and not as a sex scene. But I don't want to talk about a sex scene. That's a lot. I mean, sex, but it is.
But it is a love scene.
Yeah, it's a love scene.
And the dressing, the dressing is so romantic. I mean, that's so funny that it would be not the undressing, but the dressing.
The dressing. Yeah.
Something that really interests me about, especially because of this week, seeing the diving bell and the butterfly, and then last night with Mishima, it is really interesting to me that I think before this weekend I might have said, oh well, you can't really have a film which has a first person point of view or even a limited third person point of view, that it's really hard to do. But in fact, I've seen two examples only this weekend, and that makes it even more striking to me that that this film really is not from John's point of view.
Which the story is
100%. Like the last thought that he has is, what a bloody stupid way to die. And that's the end. She throws the knife and he thinks that, and that's the end of the story. And also, they never say, don't look now.
Yeah.
Which is the first line of the story. Don't look now, but there's two old ladies over there trying to hypnotize me.
Yeah, it starts at the restaurant, right?
Yeah. So
raise your hand if you have questions. Nick.
Giulia, you've spent a lot of time in Venice. I feel like the city was a character in the film. I wonder what you noticed.
Oh, it's very. Actually, it's still very literal. I was thinking before. The idea that the hotel was closing for the season, it's unheard of now. I mean, nothing closes. It's completely year round. Like here, by the way. But it used to close for the season, and the winter would be a really dead. So this is kind of the borderline in between the end of the summer, the fall, and when it all shuts down, and it's very creepy. But even with all the tourists, and even with the this invasion that it's now there, you get off those big beaten path, and when you find yourself in those campos, it's slightly spooky. And most of the windows are closed. The shutters are closed, so there's really nobody. And the canals, beside the big ones, they have this way of coming, popping up at you, and the bridge, you don't recognize what a bridge, so you can be here and then you're supposed to be in the other one. I mean, even this summer I was there and I was actually going to see Eric Fischel's show, so of all things. And I took the ferry. I went to from the Lido. I went to, and then my Google Map was failing me. It was a small gallery, so I had no idea where it was. And at some point, I'm looking around and I was like, how do I get out of here? That has that sense. And I think that the use of sound with the water, the drops of the water, the steps, you always feel someone's steps echo.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also the music. I mean, it's going between. It is Bach, isn't it? The little minuet-y things that keep
coming
transmuting
back
into really kind of scary music. I mean, it's a very nice move.
I believe Pino Donaggio wrote the score. This was his first film, and he's from Venice. So I don't remember how they met, but I think this is his first movie score. He didn't intend to become a film composer, but he became De Palma's favorite composer, which makes complete sense, with all the idea of suspense and thing. And I love it. And again, it's not in the way that Suspect is insinuated in any glance.
Right.
Any of those stony Italian faces, they just look at him, you don't know what's behind it.
And also the move of not translating, so that it's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you really have to decide that you're either in or out, and you get to have that feeling of disorientation. So yeah. No, it's a pretty astounding little film. But I'm curious. I mean, whether the people who have read the story saw things in the story, but
there is a raised hand.
or my husband.
Hello. Oh
yeah.
So, I want to say the first time I ever arrived in Venice, I was young, and it was nighttime, and I got off at the train station. I had to find my way around, and this was really creepy. There's really no landscape like it, which makes it perfect for this kind of movie. But what I wanted to ask you is, because I feel that there's some trigger in you picked this movie sort of because there might be some kind of similar approach to the supernatural to what you loved about all of Shirley Jackson's work. And it's maybe you could sort of talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Jim.
Set up question.
Yeah, I mean, I think they both, they're Du Maurier and Jackson, and maybe Highsmith as well. There are a number of women writers from this time period, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, who are, and this is a late story for her, 71, but most of the work she's known for is in the 40s, really. But the way that these women are coping with both the general quotidian life of womanhood and the responsibilities of being women, and open and sensitive to something greater and sort of more rebellious, I have always found really wonderful. And Renee last night used the word uncanny in a conversation, and I think there's an uncanniness to the way that they see the world, an unsettling nature to the way that they see the world that I feel is maybe truer to the way the world is than we necessarily pretend.
Yeah, it's interesting with the I think it's very profound what you said, because it's interesting about the female, those female writers.
Yeah.
Because, and this is a profoundly unsettling story in its simplicity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, anybody who has ever sort of tried to go on after a loss finds something in this story. But there is this peculiar nature in the story, and I think in the film as well, where John is compartmentalizing everything so that he can go on, and that's his method of dealing. And Laura is, taking pills and not able to cope with life and looking for a reason for all of this, and that those dual approaches are really about how different people, no matter what their gender, how different people cope with loss and change and what's scary. So, yeah.
Hold on, get a mic.
When I was watching the movie, I was struck by Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, the movie, where there was that frenzy towards the end of the movie where everything became internal and it was like a psychological terror. I was wondering I don't know if these two movies came out at the same time or there was any relationship between the directors.
No,
it struck me as being very similar.
I know it's an interesting observation. Also Venice is kind of that spooky place a little bit, and I don't know if they how these two films communicated. Visconti and Nicholas Roeg were not collaborators by anything, but I can see the internalization of this sort of sense of not stability. Even the whole thing with the architecture, when he goes up and he slips, and the thing is just like there is something in their life that they're trying to put it back together, but it's just not.
No, and also this sort of wonderful filmic technique of sort of saying like, oh, there it is. It happened. We're okay. We're going to be okay now. And you kind of have a moment when he is saved from falling. I love that. I don't know the film. I'm sorry to say I know the novel, but not the film. So
I think there is a question here. Yeah, just hold on for the mic.
I was wondering about the symbolism of the mosaics, the matching and the compulsiveness of the small pieces, and having to somehow, he was so compulsive and cerebral, and she was more into the emotion and the feeling, and the contrast.
So again, I do feel that the film is slightly more retrograde than the story in that, he's focusing on work and that's his recovery, and she's having feelings and that's her recovery. And so it's 73 is the movie,
yeah,
and 71 is the story. So I feel as if Du Maurier was really laying out the beginning of a different idea of what a relationship between a couple could be, and that Nicholas Roeg maybe was more in the mainstream. I don't really know. I'm supposing. Do you think?
I think it's a valid. I don't think he was, as a filmmaker, it was never really in the mainstream. His things were always kind of non-linear, and rather experimental compared to more mainstream British and American filmmakers. But it is a valid observation that it is a little bit more cliche that the woman would be emotional, resolve things with intuition and emotion, and the guy would be more practical.
I'm going to take a walk. I just fell off a.
But I do think that the church, the San Nicolò, the facade that is totally rotten, and the fact that he's trying to restore and he's there to restore it, it speaks to the task of putting back together something that is really hard to to put back.
Yeah, and so the little mosaics on the floor are
is
really
a symbolism
about the futility of it.
Of that. Yeah.
I was really struck by the bishop's crushing of the mosaics. And I didn't read the story, but it occurred to me that maybe the filmmakers were making a comment about the church and what seemed to me the total lack of empathy of the bishop and his disregard for the fixing of the church in a way. And so when he crushed the mosaic, it was, I thought, very telling.
So it's a lovely observation, and in fact, all from the film and not in the story. So I mean, I'm really struck with the embellishments that were necessary for the film, and that the religious aspect, John's job, starting with the death of the child instead of discovering, that he has, like, starting really with John being psychic, because he's prescient at the moment that she dies. He's running out there, but not in the story. So there's something really interesting about these two pieces of art sitting side by side. And there's something that I wanted to say in this regard, which is that I do think when you read something, you look at the words and you think something, you think about the words and then you make a picture in your mind. But when you're looking at a film, it does have the first step is already taken. So you're halfway there. It's in a way easier to watch a film and maybe a more immediate than to read something. But when you read a story that's frightening like this story, you have the option of not picturing. And when you go to the movie, you have no choice. Is that, yeah, I don't know.
And Bob.
Maybe you can hear me.
No, we need for the recording.
Oh, I see. I don't know if this will be worth recording, but
we'll let you know.
I'm just really struck by what you said, Susie, about red not really being a motif in the book, but clearly in the same way Venice was a third character, red was a character.
Yeah.
And how it couldn't have existed in the book is really striking to me. But I think, if anything, it amplifies the difference between the written word and film as a medium. And I think that's what you started with, that thought at the very beginning. I think that really expresses it beautifully,
Yeah, I mean, it's not that the red in the story doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It's that the red is reserved for one thing, Laura's red coat, mm-hmm. which she wears in Venice and then is wearing when he sees her go by on the funeral boat and can't figure out what's happening.
But that's the only mention of it that one time?
Yeah, and Christine's death is from meningitis, so she doesn't get to. So obviously Rogue must, I assume that Rogue said, "I must use red raincoat, must therefore drown," which was brilliant.
Hi, am I correct, it went by too quickly, that there were two screenwriters?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I want to acknowledge that and ask the question, if anybody knows. I don't, because it does begin first with the story and then the adaptation of the story into a script. Does anybody know whether Rogue commissioned the script or the script existed and he discovered it, or what that process was with the writers?
I don't know. I actually don't know. I know that one of the writers, and he was one of the two was Alan Scott, is the one that was most responsible. The other one was Charles Breyer, I think.
Have they done anything else?
Chris Breyer. Scott has a rather extensive body of work they're both British. The other one much less. But no, and Scott became a big producer, and I think he's produced the Netflix Gambit show, the chess.
Oh,
yeah, and I think he had the original idea, so it's an interesting connection. But I imagine the script went to Rogue. I don't think he commissioned it.
Yeah, because a lot of the choices you're talking about, there's Rogue and the visual choices that he made, etc. But a lot of the original choices are likely the result of the writer's translation to film, which a short story, in terms of time and screen time of an hour and a half to 2 hours, are part of the reasons.
It's a 50-page story, so it's not short.
Oh, okay.
But yes, I think that's right. And something else that may be evidence for what you're saying. It was really just it was less than 2 years from publication to the film coming out. So
They got on. Somebody got on it right
really
away.
fast.
But I found some of the comments that wrote today. I was thinking about this, and there is someone, and so he was very involved in the actual things on the page, because someone asked him in a interview on Little White Lies, I believe it was, why didn't you use the last line, the one you mentioned, "What a bloody silly way to die,"
Such a great line.
Yeah, and he said, "We couldn't have used that. When you're adapting a book, it's in a different place. The premise of the whole piece becomes more important than the moment. I liked this book because it was a place you could see a happy family," which is what I was referring to before.
And I also think it's a dramatic manifestation of the way that grief destroys people. So you get, you have this sense of Laura's internal grief, and then you see that that everything they touch after Christine's death is going to be different.
Yeah, and I think to what you were saying before about literature, I think that the short story handles the supernatural is a much smaller component. It's just like almost like a narrative device to to rather, and in the film is underlined constantly. The way that the lady appear and they disappear and they're not there, and it's a different.
But I think we accept things. I think we accept implausibility in film much more easily than we do on the page. I think the work to make something plausible in a story is, it's just there's a kind of intricacy to it, and all you really have to do is put something up on the screen, and people go, "Oh, okay, I believe that it happened because they made it. I'm looking at it." So. No?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that because the story is so compact, and then you have this ending, and it's completely out of the, it's really out of the blue. Here you have a connection with, the child's body and the red thing, and then the small shot, there is only one passage in the book where he says he saw a child in the dark that, and he tried to reach her to see if she wasn't lost, that one night when.
So the night that we hear the scream and then the woman's body is found the next day, in the story, they actually see the little being running, and they think that the being is being chased, not that the being is the perpetrator. So
one more there.
Actually, one comment about the book and the movie. I thought that the ladies seemed much more sort of in your face and ominous in the story than they did in the film.
Yeah.
I thought they seemed kind of more normal and less, like not that they weren't dangerous or trying or, evil in any way.
Right.
Whereas I got that impression from the story. But anyway, but I don't know. Does everybody else know this but me? So who was that lady who stabbed him at the end?
She's the serial killer who has been in the story, you don't in the story, again, a 50-page story, it's on page 35 or 6 where somebody says, well, John goes to the police to look for Laura after he sees her on the boat, and somebody outside, as he's waiting to report that Laura's missing, says, well, I hope you're not here about the serial killer. And he's like, what serial killer? Because we never look at the newspaper when we're traveling. And so that's actually a really brave move on du Maurier's part. I would say that she introduces something pretty late into the plot that manages to pay off for the entire story. So,
yeah, and okay.
Oh, Bob, here.
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask if everybody noticed the Scavone sign.
Oh, yes. Yes, they're everywhere. Yeah.
Okay.
Very minor point, but does anybody remember that the little boy in the funeral was wearing a big red cap going up
Yeah.
the stairs.
Oh my gosh, I did not notice that.
Yes.
Very assertive.
Yeah.
And
Was playing with a red ball. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
and just one other thing about the relative innocuousness of the two women. What was that scene where they were laughing hysterically? And we were supposed to think that they had some fiendish, plot
Yeah.
subtext that we
Yeah.
didn't know about, but it was never followed
So-
up.
And again, because the story is really John's story, that's a moment that I find particularly grating, because I don't want to not believe in those women. I want to believe that their aims are benign.
I think that was the overall impression, but then there was that scene.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. It's a strange little scene. I think Melanie over there. Yeah.
Right.
And what
Sorry. You didn't think what about the women? But in the story, John doesn't think that they're benign, but Laura really does. There's no moment where their psychicness is not in play, really. And in the story, it feels as if John's lack of desire to connect with them is really about his compartmentalization and his desire not to feel the feelings that Laura's feeling, because he wants to fix Laura. He's utterly focused on her. So
I was thinking about the the photograph when he was looking at the photographs of the church,
yeah.
in the stained glass, and then there's the little red figure sitting in the pew, and that's when he spills the wine on,
Right.
and I can't remember now if it was in the story or in the film where I think it's one of the women says he sees the future. So many of the
in both.
images
It's
are,
in both, but
Yeah.
it's slightly more reasonable in the story. She figures it out because of something that he says in the story, I think, and but the whole thing of him running out to the pond is in the film, so they have that, they can say it.
Right.
Yeah.
Figures it out when he sees them dressed for the funeral, but he doesn't know why.
Yeah.
Saw her because he didn't know.
But so also in seeing the film again, you would see that like all the melting of the celluloid in blood is really him seeing his future before it, so this film is, and the story are also about the inevitability of your fate, or as we say in our house, your destiny.
You use the word supernatural. Why?
Oh, did I use that word? I do feel that. I mean, their psychic abilities were that they had the ability to see things that hadn't happened. So I guess maybe that's not a fair term. It depends on how. I'm just saying
I
they.
thought maybe maybe in the reading there was more to it. I certainly didn't see that in the film. Any supernatural.
Well, so I hear you, because we could thumb wrestle about this, because I do think that in a way things that happen in film that are pretty strange we just accept. And if you were reading on the page, which isn't in the story, the melting of the celluloid into blood, you would say, "Oh, that's weird." But as a film technique, we just buy it. Does that help a little? Yeah.
Last one.
So when we were just talking about that, actually, it just brought it home to me. Like, I get the sense of gothicness, right? So when you talk about like Shirley Jackson, and you talk about Daphne du Maurier, and you talk about like all of these authors of that genre, it's like there's this gothicness, and it's really strange because it's like it looks a little bit different in film than what it feels like in the book. You know, so if you think about the book Rebecca and like the air, like the wind coming through, and you feel like there's this thing that's about to happen and you can't figure out what it is, but it's creating atmosphere. And it's like, I feel like it does resemble the supernatural. But like, so I wonder, you know, would you define this as a Gothic film?
I would definitely define it as a Gothic story. And it's funny that you say that, because I think the area of literature that I am most drawn to is really sort of normal women's lives that have what I would call a kind of a surreal quality to them, you know, that where the acts of the imagination are overwhelming the acts of reality. And some people might say that that is true of, you know, the way I see the world. There are a number of people here. My real husband and my work husband are both here. So, but that I do think that quality that you could call Gothic is really something about this kind of odd beauty in the way this group of writers saw the lives of women and the way that women examine their world, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It's interesting because this film, I don't know if I don't believe you can apply the term Gothic to the film, just because of the visual references are so completely different. But it's interesting because this film has been referred to as a horror. And it's not. I mean, it's not a horror movie, but it's constantly one of the scariest horror. You know, the definition. And I was like, when did it start? And I'm sure it wasn't at the beginning. You know, when it came out. But right now, it's just like one of the great horror films ever. And it's not a horror. It's
At
just
all.
not that genre.
No. I mean, it's some kind of psychological thriller. Yeah. I do want to say, because I know you have to go, but just one last thing, which is last year or 2 years ago, I taught Rebecca to the MFA students at Stony Brook, and I was so excited to reread it. And that was a book written in the 40s and really Gothic. And reading it now, I was like, wait, so Max de Winter's wife cheats on him, he kills her, and everybody in town says, you're right, Max, you should do that. Like, we're on your side, because ladies should not do that. And that was really interesting to me, because Daphne du Maurier from the 40s to the 70s clearly had an evolution in the way that she thought about relationships and life and men and women. So... Yes. Oh, even the wife thinks he should have killed Rebecca. Yes. Yes, the unnamed wife. Yeah.
We actually need to move here, but if you come out upstairs, we have a little toast for Susan, so you can continue talking about this.